The autumn wind whistled through the gaps in the old barn doors as Jace pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders. Night had fallen earlier than he'd expected, and the temperature was dropping fast. A harvest moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across his modest farmland. At 38, Jace had grown accustomed to the rhythm of rural life, the morning chores, the afternoon repairs, the evening feeding of livestock. Tonight was no different, or so he thought. "Come on, Rufus," he called to his aging shepherd mix. The dog's ears perked up at the sound of his name, but he remained strangely fixed in place near the far corner of the barn, his body rigid with attention. "What is it, boy?" Rufus let out a low growl, unusual for the gentle animal. Jace frowned. 9 years together had taught him to trust the dog's instincts. "Someone there?" Jace called out, reaching for the flashlight hanging on a nearby post. The beam cut through the dusty air, illuminating floating particles and the weathered interior of the structure. Nothing seemed out of place. Hay bales stacked against the wall, farm equipment organized along the opposite side, feed bags secured in metal bins to keep out vermin. But Rufus wouldn't budge. His growl deepened. Yet there was something hesitant in it, not the threatening rumble he reserved for predators or strangers with ill intent. Jace approached cautiously, scanning the shadowy corners. That's when he heard it. A small, almost imperceptible intake of breath. Someone, or something, was hiding behind the last stack of hay bales. "I know you're there," he said firmly, adjusting his grip on the flashlight. "Come on out now." No response. Jace stepped closer, and Rufus moved with him, his posture alert but not aggressive. When Jace finally angled the light behind the bales, what he saw made him nearly drop the flashlight. A child. No, not quite a child. Crouched there, arms wrapped around knees pulled tight to a small chest. The skin was a soft shade of green, almost luminescent in the darkness. 2 eyes, larger than a human's and with vertical pupils like a cat's, reflected the light with a faint yellow glow. They were wide with terror, fixed not on Jace, but on Rufus. Jace felt his mouth go dry. He'd heard rumors, of course, whispered stories in town about strange lights in the sky, about government cover-ups and extraterrestrial visitors. But they were just that, rumors. The stuff of late-night radio shows and conspiracy theorists. Not something you found shivering in your barn on a Tuesday evening. It's okay," he said softly, lowering both his voice and the flashlight beam so it wouldn't shine directly in those fearful eyes. "We won't hurt you." The creature, the child, pressed further back against the wall. Jace noticed torn footwear, clothing that hung in tatters, and what appeared to be marks on the exposed parts of green skin. This wasn't just a lost visitor. This was someone who had escaped something terrible. Rufus whined softly, sensing Jace's confusion and concern. The sound made the alien child flinch violently. "Rufus, stay," Jace commanded gently, placing a restraining hand on the dog's collar. He had to make a choice now, a choice that could potentially change everything. The responsible thing would be to call authorities. But what authorities? Local police. They'd be out of their depth. Government agencies. The thought sent a chill down his spine. He'd seen enough science fiction to know how that usually played out for the extraterrestrial visitor. The alien child was clearly terrified, injured, and alone. "Are you hungry?" Jace asked, knowing he wouldn't get a verbal response, but hoping the meaning would somehow translate. He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a granola bar, his usual evening snack during chores. He unwrapped it carefully, broke off a small piece, and set it on the ground before backing away. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with movements so cautious, they were barely perceptible, the child reached out a thin arm, too thin, and snatched the morsel. Jace watched as it was examined, sniffed, and finally consumed with desperate quickness. More? He asked, offering another piece. This time, the child took it more readily, though still flinching whenever Rufus shifted his weight or made the slightest sound. Jace made a decision then. "Wait here," he said, though he doubted the instruction was necessary. The child wasn't going anywhere near Rufus willingly. "Come on, boy," he added to the dog, and they retreated from the barn. Inside his modest farmhouse, Jace gathered supplies: a clean blanket, a thermos of water, a peanut butter sandwich, lacking any knowledge of alien dietary needs. He figured simple was safest, and a small, battery-operated lamp. He returned to the barn alone, leaving Rufus reluctantly in the house despite the dog's whining protests. The alien child hadn't moved, though those luminous eyes tracked Jace's every movement as he set down the supplies at a respectful distance. "For you," he said, gesturing to the items. "It's cold tonight. The blanket will help." He backed away again, settling on an overturned bucket several yards away. "I'll just sit here for a bit if that's okay. My name is Jace. This is my farm." He kept his voice low and even, the same tone he used with injured animals. "You're safe here." It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but it felt right to make it. For hours, Jace maintained his quiet vigil, sometimes speaking softly about inconsequential things: tomorrow's weather, the crops he was planning for spring, Rufus's favorite game of fetch. Gradually, the alien child reached for the blanket, wrapping it around narrow shoulders. The water was next, sipped tentatively at first, then gulped with obvious thirst. Only when the child finally fell into what appeared to be sleep did Jace quietly leave the barn, securing the door, but not locking it. Whatever had happened to bring this unexpected visitor to his farm, one thing was clear: someone, somewhere, was looking for them. And Jace had just made himself part of something much bigger than his quiet, solitary life. Morning came with frost clinging to the browning grass and a thin mist hovering over the fields. Jace rose before dawn, as was his habit, and peered out his kitchen window toward the barn. Had he dreamed the entire encounter? The possibility seemed more reasonable in the clear light of day than the alternative: that an alien child was hiding in his barn. Rufus padded to his side, nails clicking on the worn linoleum floor. The dog looked up at Jace expectantly, then toward the door. "All right, boy, let's check." They crossed the yard together, Rufus trotting ahead with his usual morning energy. At the barn door, Jace hesitated, then pushed it open slowly to avoid startling his visitor, if the visitor was still there. The blanket lay in a heap where he'd last seen the child, but the space behind the hay bales was empty. Jace felt a curious mixture of relief and disappointment. Maybe it had been a dream, or perhaps the child had moved on during the night, continuing whatever journey had brought them to Earth. Then, Rufus's ears pricked forward, and he trotted purposefully toward the ladder leading to the hayloft. Jace followed, climbing the wooden rungs carefully. There, curled in the corner, furthest from the opening, was the alien child. In the morning light, filtering through gaps in the roof, Jace could see his visitor more clearly. The child appeared female, with delicate features despite the dirt and what Jace now recognized as bruises mottling the green skin. Her hair was a deeper green, almost black, and cropped unevenly close to her head. She wore what might have been a uniform once, gray fabric with an insignia on the sleeve that had been deliberately torn away. She was awake and watching them warily. Her body tensed to flee, though there was nowhere to go except down the ladder past them. "Good morning," Jace said softly. Rufus whined softly beside him, and the girl's eyes fixed on the dog with unmistakable fear. "It's okay. Rufus won't hurt you. He's gentle." To demonstrate, Jace knelt and ran his hand along Rufus's back. The dog sat obediently, though his gaze remained fixed on their visitor with obvious curiosity. "I brought breakfast," Jace continued, setting down a small basket he'd carried up. Nothing fancy. Just some eggs and bread. And more water. He backed away toward the ladder. I'll be doing chores around the farm if you need anything. Rufus usually stays with me, but... He considered, then looked at the dog. Rufus, stay. Rufus looked up at him, head tilted in confusion. Stay, Jace repeated firmly, pointing to a spot several feet away from the girl. Guard. The dog settled down, and Jace descended the ladder, hoping that his companion's calm presence might eventually ease the girl's fears. It was a risk. She was clearly terrified of Rufus, but Jace had seen the dog's effect on frightened creatures before. Sometimes presence was more effective than absence when building trust. Throughout the day, Jace busied himself with the endless tasks of maintaining the farm, feeding the small flock of chickens, mending a section of fence damaged in the last storm, chopping wood for the coming winter. Periodically, he returned to the barn to check on his visitors. By midday, he found an unexpected tableau. Rufus still lay where commanded, but he had crept forward, perhaps a foot. The girl remained in her corner, but the distance between them had decreased. The food had been eaten, and the girl was watching Rufus with something closer to curiosity than terror. Making friends? Jace asked quietly. Both sets of eyes turned to him, one brown and familiar, one yellow and alien. Neither moved. Good, he said, and left them to their cautious negotiations. That evening, when Jace returned with dinner, a simple stew he'd prepared, he found the gap between girl and dog had narrowed further. Rufus's tail thumped softly against the wooden floor when Jace appeared, but he didn't break his vigil. Thought you might like something warm, Jace said, setting down the covered bowl. It's getting colder at night now. He settled on a hay bale. Not too close, but not as far as before. I'm going to call you something, if that's all right. Just until you can tell me your real name. He studied her quietly glowing eyes in the dimming light. How about Luma? Because of that light in your eyes. The newly named Luma didn't respond, but she didn't shy away when he moved to place the bowl closer to her. Progress, of a sort. As darkness fell, Jace reluctantly called Rufus to follow him back to the house. To his surprise, the dog hesitated, looking back at Luma. Come on, boy. We'll be back in the morning. In the safety of his kitchen, with the doors locked and curtains drawn, Jace finally allowed himself to consider the magnitude of what he was doing. Harboring an escaped alien child, at that, was surely illegal under any law, terrestrial or otherwise. Someone owned that uniform she wore. Someone had caused those bruises, and that someone would be looking for her. The responsible thing would be to seek help. But who could he trust? The local sheriff? The state police? Some anonymous government hotline? Each option seemed more dangerous than the last. No, for now at least. Luma's safety was his responsibility alone. Tomorrow, he would try to learn more about where she'd come from, about who might be pursuing her. Tonight, he would let her rest in whatever peace his farm could provide. 3 days passed in this careful pattern. Jace tending to his farm, Rufus maintaining his protective watch over Luma, and the alien girl gradually relaxing in their presence. She had begun to venture down from the hayloft, though she still kept her distance from both man and dog. On the 4th morning, Jace made a discovery. Entering the barn with breakfast, oatmeal today, he found Luma seated on a hay bale, her tattered uniform top pulled aside as she examined what appeared to be a burn on her shoulder. When she heard him, she quickly covered herself, but not before Jace glimpsed a pattern of similar marks across her back. They weren't random injuries. They were deliberate, brands or identification marks seared into her flesh. Anger flared in Jace's chest, a protective fury he hadn't felt in years. Someone had done this to a child. Someone had treated her as property to be marked and claimed. I'm sorry, he said, setting down the food. I wish I could help with those. Luma watched him with those luminous eyes. And for the first time, Jace thought he detected something beyond fear in them, a flicker of assessment. She was measuring him, trying to determine his intentions. I won't hurt you, he promised. Neither will Rufus. This is your home now, for as long as you need it to be. The words surprised him as they left his mouth. When had his barn become her home? When had he decided this wasn't temporary? Luma's hand moved to her neck, where Jace noticed for the first time a thin cord disappearing beneath her collar. She hesitated, then slowly withdrew a small pendant, a crystalline object that emitted a faint glow, similar to the light in her eyes. It's beautiful, Jace said honestly. Is it from your home? Luma clutched it tightly, then tucked it away again. But the gesture felt like a response, the first real communication she'd offered. Later that day, as Jace repaired a tractor part in the open barn doorway, he glanced up to see Luma sitting nearer to Rufus than ever before. The dog lay with his head on his paws, eyes half closed in contentment. As Jace watched, Luma's hand extended, trembling slightly, toward Rufus's ear. The dog didn't move, didn't even open his eyes fully, though his tail gave a single, slow wag. Luma's fingers hovered just above the soft fur, then withdrew. Then, gathering courage, she reached out again and made the briefest contact, a whisper of touch against Rufus's ear. The dog's tail wagged once more, and Luma snatched her hand back, eyes wide. But there was no fear in them now, only wonder. Jace looked away before she noticed him watching, but a smile tugged at his mouth. Trust was growing, slowly but surely. Trust that might eventually extend to him as well. That night, for the first time since her arrival, Jace heard a sound that froze his blood. He had been dozing in his armchair, a book open on his lap, Rufus snoring softly by the hearth. The noise came through the slightly open window, a mechanical hum, too even to be an insect or night bird, too quiet to be a vehicle on the distant road. He moved to the window, careful not to create a silhouette against the lamplight behind him. High above his property, nearly invisible against the night sky, a small object hovered. It wasn't much larger than a dinner plate, but its movement was too precise, too controlled to be natural. A drone of some kind, scanning with a faint blue light that swept methodically across his fields. Looking for something, looking for someone. As he watched, the drone completed its survey and moved on, disappearing over the tree line at the edge of his property. Jace remained at the window for nearly an hour, but it didn't return. They had found her general location. It was only a matter of time before they narrowed the search. The next morning, Jace tuned his old radio to the emergency band, something he hadn't done since the wildfire season 3 years back. For hours, there was nothing but static and routine transmissions. Then, just after noon, a voice broke through, clipped, professional, speaking in what sounded like code. The asset recovery operation in Sector 7. Tracking signal intermittent but consistent with quadrant markers. All units maintain comm discipline. Authorized retrieval only. Repeat. Authorized retrieval only. Indigenous population remains unaware. Maintain protocol. Jace felt the hair on his arms stand on end. They weren't just looking. They were organizing a retrieval. And they were close enough to be on his local emergency band. He needed to warn Luma, to prepare her for the possibility of discovery. But how could he communicate something so complex to someone who hadn't spoken a word since her arrival? When he entered the barn, he found Luma and Rufus in the most remarkable position yet. She was seated on a hay bale, and Rufus had his head resting against her knee. One small green hand lay tentatively on the dog's head, and though she withdrew it when Jace appeared, the moment of connection had been real. Luma, he said urgently, we need to talk, or I need to talk, and I hope you understand. He knelt to bring himself closer to her eye level. Someone's looking for you. They have machines. He mimicked the drone's movement with his hand, searching the area. I think they're getting closer. Luma's eyes widened, and her hand went to the pendant beneath her clothing. Yes, I think they might be tracking that. Jace agreed, gesturing to where her hand clutched the crystal. But I don't want you to give it up. It's yours. It matters to you. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting at the communication barrier. We need to hide it somehow, block the signal. Luma stared at him for a long moment, then slowly withdrew the pendant. In the daylight, Jace could see it more clearly, a shard of crystal that seemed to contain shifting lights within its structure, like a miniature aurora captured in stone. Luma closed her fist around it, concentrating, and the glow dimmed noticeably. You can control it? Jace asked, surprised. Luma nodded, the first direct response to any question he'd asked. Good. Keep it dim like that. It might help. He hesitated, then added, If they come, when they come, I'll do everything I can to protect you. I promise. Luma's expression remained unreadable, but her free hand moved to rest on Rufus's head again. The dog leaned into her touch, eyes closing in contentment. It was a small gesture, but to Jace, it spoke volumes. She was choosing to trust, despite everything that had happened to her. The least he could do was honor that trust with whatever protection he could offer. That night, he brought extra blankets to the barn and made a bed for himself near the door. Rufus settled beside Luma in the hayloft, his body a warm barrier between her and whatever might come in the darkness. Just for tonight, Jace told them both, just to be safe. But as he lay awake, listening to the night sounds of his farm, he knew it wouldn't be just for tonight. Something was coming, something that would shatter the fragile peace they had built. And when it came, he would need to be ready. The storm rolled in 2 nights later, bringing with it driving rain and winds that rattled the barn's wooden structure. Jace had spent the intervening time preparing as best he could, stockpiling food in various hiding places around the property, preparing a go-bag with essentials, even oiling his father's old hunting rifle that had hung unused above the fireplace for years. The rational part of him felt ridiculous. He was a farmer, not a soldier or a spy. What could he possibly do against whoever, whatever, was hunting Luma? But then he would catch sight of the burns on her skin, or the way she still flinched at sudden movements, and his resolve would harden. He might not be a hero from a science fiction movie, but he could stand between a child and those who had hurt her. Lightning flashed, momentarily transforming the barn into a tableau of harsh shadows and blinding light. Thunder followed almost immediately, a crack so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Rufus whined softly from his position beside Luma, who had pressed herself into the corner of the hayloft, eyes wide with fear. Just a storm, Jace called up to her. It'll pass. But even as he spoke, he caught a sound beneath the rain and wind, a mechanical hum, familiar yet different from the drone he'd spotted days earlier. This was larger, deeper, the sound of a substantial craft. Jace moved to the barn door, easing it open just enough to peer outside. Through the sheets of rain, he could make out lights, not the random flashes of lightning, but steady, directed beams, sweeping his property in a deliberate pattern. They were coming from a craft hovering perhaps 50 feet above his farmhouse. Its design, unlike anything he'd ever seen, sleek, almost organic in its curves, but clearly mechanical. They're here, he said, turning back to Luma. We need to... His words died as he saw her expression. Pure terror had transformed her features. Her eyes so wide the yellow glow seemed to fill them entirely. She was staring not at him, but at the pendant in her hand, which had begun to pulse with light despite her obvious attempts to suppress it. They're tracking it, Jace realized aloud. They know exactly where you are. The beams of light converged on the barn, Jace moved quickly, climbing the ladder to the hayloft. "Come with me," he urged, holding out his hand to Luma. "We need to hide." But she shook her head violently, clutching the pendant. Her mouth opened, and for the first time since her arrival, she spoke, a single word in a voice raw from disuse. "Go." "I'm not leaving you," Jace insisted. "Rufus, come." The dog stood, positioning himself between Luma and the barn door, hackles raised. He, too, had heard the approaching threat. A beam of light, more focused than the others, cut through a gap in the barn wall, sweeping across the interior until it found the hayloft and the pulsing light of Luma's pendant. The beam locked onto the crystal, and a mechanical voice from outside announced, "Asset located, commencing retrieval." Jace's mind raced. They couldn't escape. The craft was blocking the only exit, and the storm made running across open fields a suicide mission. They couldn't hide. The pendant signal had given them away. All that remained was to stand their ground. He reached for the rifle he'd propped against the hayloft wall. "Stay behind me," he told Luma, who was now trembling visibly, her eyes fixed on the barn door. Rufus growled, a deep rumble that Jace felt more than heard. The door burst open with a crash that sent splinters of wood flying into the barn. 3 figures entered, humanoid, but clearly not human. They were tall, unnaturally slim, their bodies encased in form-fitting armor that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the light. Their heads were elongated, with no visible features, except what might have been sensory apparatuses where eyes should be. "Stand aside, Earth Dweller," one of them commanded in heavily accented English. "The asset belongs to the Consortium. Interference is a violation of Sector Treaty 5.7. "She's not an asset," Jace replied, raising the rifle to his shoulder. "She's a child, and she's under my protection." The lead figure made a sound that might have been laughter. "Protection? You? A primitive with a chemical propellant weapon?" It raised an arm, revealing a device built into the armor. "Final warning. Stand aside." Rufus barked sharply, advancing a step toward the intruders. The lead figure pointed its arm device at the dog, and a high-pitched whine filled the air. "No!" Jace shouted, and fired the rifle. The bullet struck the figure's armor and ricocheted with a spark, embedding itself in the barn wall. The figure didn't even flinch. "Retrieval team, engage," it ordered. What followed was chaos. The 3 hunters spread out, each raising different weapons. One fired what appeared to be a net of glowing energy toward the hayloft. Jace pulled Luma aside, and the net sizzled as it struck the wood where they'd been standing. Another hunter fired a beam that narrowly missed Rufus, who was now barking furiously, darting forward to snap at the nearest intruder before retreating. Jace fired again, aiming for the joints in the armor, where he hoped it might be vulnerable. This time, the bullet found purchase, and the hunter staggered, black fluid seeping from its shoulder joint. But the victory was short-lived. The third hunter swung what looked like a simple rod, which extended into a crackling staff of energy that caught Jace across the chest, sending him flying backward into the hay. Pain exploded through his body, every nerve ending screaming in agony. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe as the electricity, if that's what it was, coursed through him. Through vision, blurred with pain, he saw Rufus launch himself at the hunter who had struck Jace. The dog's teeth found purchase on the creature's arm, and it let out a shriek of pain or surprise. But the lead hunter swung its rod, catching Rufus mid-leap and sending him crashing to the ground with a yelp that cut through Jace like a knife. "Rufus!" he gasped, struggling to rise despite the paralyzing pain. The dog lay still, his side rising and falling with shallow breaths, alive, but injured. "Secure the asset," the lead hunter ordered, and the other 2 moved toward the hayloft where Luma crouched, her pendant now blazing with light. "Run!" Jace managed to call to her, though there was nowhere to run. Luma looked from Jace to Rufus, her expression shifting from terror to something else. Something harder, colder. She stood, the pendant clutched in both hands now, its light so bright it cast her shadow against the barn wall behind her. "No," she said, the word clear and firm. "No more." The hunters hesitated, their sensory apparatuses fixed on the glowing crystal. "Asset L927, you will comply," the lead hunter commanded. "The pendant is property of the consortium. Surrender it and yourself immediately." Luma's response was not in words. The light from the pendant intensified, changing from a steady glow to a pulsing rhythm that seemed to match her heartbeat. The hunters took a step back, then another. "Asset L927, disengage the resonance core immediately," the leader ordered. But there was a new note in its voice, fear. Luma closed her eyes, her small body trembling with effort or emotion, or both. The pendant's light grew until it was painful to look at directly, filling the barn with a golden radiance that cast no shadows. Then, with a sound like a crystal glass shattering, the light exploded outward in a shockwave that knocked Jace flat against the hayloft floor. The hunters were thrown bodily across the barn, their armor cracking under the force of the blast. Equipment shorted out in showers of sparks. The very air seemed to vibrate with energy. And then, silence. The light receded to a gentle glow around Luma, who stood swaying in the aftermath of whatever power she had unleashed. The pendant dimmed to a soft pulse once more, and she tucked it back beneath her tattered clothing with shaking hands. Jace pushed himself up, wincing at the residual pain from the hunter's weapon. The three intruders lay scattered across the barn floor, their armor damaged, sensory apparatuses dark. Whether they were dead or merely unconscious, he couldn't tell. "Luma," he called softly. She turned to him, her eyes wide and tearful. Then her gaze shifted to Rufus, still lying motionless on the ground below, and a small cry escaped her. Jace climbed down the ladder as quickly as his injured body would allow. Kneeling beside Rufus, he ran gentle hands over the dog's form, checking for broken bones or worse. To his immense relief, he found only superficial injuries. The hunter's weapon had stunned, rather than seriously harmed his loyal companion. "He'll be okay," Jace said, looking up at Luma, who had descended the ladder and now stood a few feet away, uncertainty written across her features. "He's tough. Old Rufus." As if in response to his name, the dog's eyes fluttered open. He whined softly, attempting to rise but lacking the strength. "Easy, boy," Jace soothed. "Rest a minute." Luma took a hesitant step forward, then another, until she knelt on Rufus's other side. With infinite gentleness, she placed a hand on the dog's head. Rufus's tail gave a weak thump against the ground. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words clear despite her obvious unfamiliarity with English. "I'm sorry." Jace wasn't sure if she was apologizing to him, to Rufus, or to herself for the power she had unleashed. Perhaps all three. "You saved us," he told her firmly. "You have nothing to be sorry for." A groan from one of the fallen hunters reminded them that their safety was still far from assured. The lead hunter was stirring, its damaged armor emitting sparks and that same high-pitched whine Jace had heard earlier. "We need to go," he said urgently. "Their ship is still outside. Others might come." He helped Rufus to his feet, supporting the dog's weight against his leg. To his surprise, Luma moved to Rufus's other side, her small frame somehow finding the strength to help bear the dog's weight. Together, they made their way to the barn door and peered out into the stormy night. The craft still hovered above the farmhouse, but its lights had dimmed, as if the energy blast had affected it as well. Rain lashed at them as they stepped outside, Rufus gaining strength with each step but still moving gingerly. "The woods," Jace decided, pointing toward the tree line beyond his fields. "We can hide there until—" A sound from above cut him off, a mechanical grinding followed by a burst of static. The craft was activating some kind of system. "Run!" Jace urged, and they broke into a stumbling trot across the rain-soaked ground. Rufus, keeping pace despite his injuries. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the woods when a beam of light shot from the craft, far more powerful than the searching beams from before. It struck the ground just ahead of them, scorching the earth in a perfect circle. A warning shot. Jace halted, Luma and Rufus stopping with him. The beam repositioned itself, creating another circle around them, a target. "They're going to fire again," Jace realized. "We need cover." But there was nothing, no barn, no tractor, not even a large rock to shelter behind. Just open field and driving rain. Luma's hand went to her pendant once more. "Can you do it again?" Jace asked her. "What you did in the barn." She shook her head, her expression grim. The pendant glowed faintly, but nothing like the blinding light it had emitted earlier. Whatever power she had channeled, it had taken its toll. The beam around them intensified, the circle shrinking, as if tightening a noose. Jace looked from Luma to Rufus, desperation clawing at his chest. He had promised to protect them both, and he was failing. Then, from the darkness beyond the beam's circle, came a new sound, the crack of projectile weapons. But unlike his old rifle, these were sharper, more controlled. The beam wavered, then cut out entirely as the craft above them rocked under impact. "Down!" a voice commanded from the darkness, and Jace pulled Luma and Rufus to the ground, just as something streaked over their heads. A missile of some kind that struck the hovering craft with pinpoint accuracy. The explosion was deafening. Debris rained down around them, some pieces still burning despite the downpour. The craft listed sideways, smoke pouring from a gaping hole in its side, then crashed into the empty field beyond Jace's house with a ground-shaking impact. Figures emerged from the tree line, humanoid, but clearly armed with technology far beyond Earth's current capabilities. They moved with military precision, securing the crash site and approaching Jace, Luma, and Rufus with weapons raised. Jace positioned himself in front of his companions, though he knew his body would provide little protection against whatever weapons these new arrivals carried. The leader of the group stepped forward, removing a helmet to reveal a human face, or at least a face that appeared human, aged around 60, with silver hair cropped short, and eyes that held both authority and concern. "Jace Tanner?" the figure asked. Jace blinked in surprise. "How do you know my name?" "We've been monitoring communications. The consortium has been quite explicit about your interference." The figure's gaze moved to Luma, and something like relief passed across those weathered features. "Princess Lumina, you're alive." Luma, or Lumina apparently, stared at the newcomer with wide eyes. Recognition dawned slowly, and she took a hesitant step forward. "Ryle?" she asked, her voice small but clear. The figure knelt, bringing himself to her eye level. "Yes, Your Highness. I've come to take you home." Jace felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "Princess?" Ryle looked up at him. "You didn't know. You've been harboring the heir to the Lumerian throne, the last surviving member of the royal family after the consortium's coup." His expression softened. "And you've done so at great personal risk. The Resistance thanks you." Resistance, throne, coup. The words swirled in Jace's mind, too fantastic to fully comprehend. He had thought he was protecting a escaped slave child. Instead, he had stumbled into an interstellar conflict. He began, then shook his head. "She needed help. And you gave it freely," Ryle acknowledged. "A rare quality in these times." He turned to his team. "Secure the perimeter. The consortium will send reinforcements once they realize the retrieval team has failed." The soldiers, if that's what they were, dispersed efficiently. Some heading toward the downed craft, others establishing positions around Jace's property. "We need to move quickly," Ryle told Jace and Lumina. The princess must be evacuated before more hunters arrive. Rufus whined softly, pressing against Jace's leg. Lumina looked from the dog to Jace, something like panic crossing her features. They come too, she said firmly to Ryle, gesturing to Jace and Rufus. They protected me. Ryle hesitated. Your Highness, the extraction plan. They come, Lumina repeated, her small hand finding Jace's larger one and gripping it tightly. Or I stay. Even in a child's voice, there was unmistakable authority in those words. Ryle bowed his head slightly. As you wish, Your Highness. He looked at Jace. Can you travel? Jace thought of his farm, the crops waiting to be harvested, the animals needing care, the life he had built over years of solitary work. Then he looked at Lumina, at the trust in her eyes as she held his hand, and at Rufus, who had risked his life to protect her. Some choices made themselves. We can travel, he confirmed. Ryle nodded. Then we must hurry. Our ship is concealed in the forest. As they moved toward the tree line, Lumina's step faltered. She looked back at the barn, her first sanctuary on this strange planet. Thank you, she whispered. And though she spoke to the building, Jace knew the gratitude extended to him as well. You're welcome, he replied simply. Together, farmer, princess, and dog, they followed Ryle into the forest, leaving behind the quiet life Jace had known and moving towards something he could barely imagine. The rain continued to fall, washing away their footprints as they disappeared into the darkness. The rebel ship was nothing like the sleek, predatory craft of the consortium hunters. It was bulkier, clearly designed for function over form, with additions and modifications that spoke of limited resources but considerable ingenuity. To Jace, who had never been in anything more advanced than a commercial airliner, it was still a marvel of technology. Ryle led them through a series of corridors to a small chamber that appeared to serve as both medical bay and briefing room. Screens displayed information in a language Jace couldn't read, and equipment hummed with quiet efficiency. Please, sit, Ryle instructed, gesturing to a row of seats along one wall. We should attend to your injuries before departure. Jace hadn't realized how battered he actually was until that moment. Now, in the relative safety of the ship, the adrenaline began to fade, and pain surged to replace it. His chest burned where the hunter's energy staff had struck him, and numerous cuts and bruises from the explosion made themselves known with throbbing insistence. A medic, or what Jace assumed was a medic, approached with devices that looked nothing like Earth medical equipment. Jace eyed them warily. It's all right, Ryle assured him. Standard field treatment, nothing invasive. Rufus first, Jace insisted, indicating his dog who lay panting softly at his feet. The medic looked to Ryle, who nodded. The canine companion is important to the princess. Treat it with care. Jace watched as the medic ran a handheld device over Rufus's body, focusing on the areas where the hunter's weapon had struck. A soft blue light emanated from the device, and wherever it passed, Rufus's breathing seemed to ease. Remarkable, the medic commented. The physical structure is quite resilient for a non-sentient species. Minimal cellular damage from the neurodisruptor. He's tough, Jace agreed, resting a hand on Rufus's head. The dog's tail thumped weakly against the floor in response. Lumina sat close to Rufus, her small hand resting on his flank. The terror that had marked her features since Jace had found her was gradually receding, replaced by a guarded watchfulness that seemed too adult for her apparent age. Once Rufus had been treated, the medic turned to Jace, who submitted to the strange healing technology with nervous fascination. The blue light felt warm where it touched his injuries, and the pain receded almost immediately. The damage is superficial, the medic reported to Ryle. He will recover fully. Good. Ryle turned to address someone on a communication device in his native language. Then, looked back to Jace. We are preparing for departure. The consortium has dispatched additional hunters. We must be gone before they arrive. Where are we going? Jace asked. To the resistance base on the far side of your moon, Ryle replied. It's the nearest safe haven. The moon, Jace repeated, the reality of his situation hitting him anew. There's a base on our moon. One of several throughout your solar system, Ryle confirmed. Your governments are aware of some, ignorant of others. The politics are complex. Jace wanted to ask more. About the resistance, about Lumina's royal status, about how Earth fit into this larger interstellar conflict. But a more immediate concern pressed on him. My farm, he said. The animals. A team will remain behind to secure the area and attend to your property, Ryle assured him. We understand the importance of maintaining appearances. As far as your local authorities will know, you've taken a sudden trip to visit family. Jace nodded, grateful, yet unsettled by how thoroughly the resistance had planned for this contingency. How long had they been watching? How much did they know about his quiet, unremarkable life? A gentle pressure on his arm interrupted his thoughts. Lumina had moved to sit beside him, her yellow eyes studying his face with concern. You hurt, she said softly. I'm okay, he assured her. The medicine helped. She nodded, then surprised him by leaning against his side in a gesture of trust, or perhaps comfort. Whether seeking it or offering it, he wasn't sure. I'm sorry, she whispered, for bringing danger. You have nothing to be sorry for, Jace told her firmly. None of this is your fault. But your home is just a place, he interrupted gently. You and Rufus are what matter. Rufus, hearing his name, raised his head and gave a soft woof of agreement. The sound drew a smile from Lumina, the first genuine smile Jace had seen on her face. Ryle approached, his expression grave despite the successful rescue. Your Highness, there is much we must discuss, about your parents, about the situation on Lumeria. Later, Lumina said with unexpected firmness. After we're safe. Something in her tone silenced even the veteran retainer. Ryle bowed slightly. As you wish, Your Highness. The ship shuddered as engines engaged, and Jace felt a momentary surge of panic. This was really happening. He was leaving Earth, perhaps for good, to join an alien resistance movement he knew nothing about, all because a child had appeared in his barn. And yet, looking at Lumina and Rufus, he couldn't bring himself to regret the choice. Whatever awaited them beyond Earth's atmosphere, they would face it together. The journey to the moon took remarkably little time, perhaps an hour, though Jace's sense of time had become unreliable in the face of so many shocks. He spent most of the flight gazing out a small viewport, watching as his home planet receded to a blue marble suspended in blackness. Then, as the cratered surface of the moon grew from a distant disk to fill his view, the resistance base was hidden within a crater on the far side, invisible to Earth-based observation. As they descended, Jace could see that the facility was extensive, a network of structures built into and beneath the lunar surface, with ships of various designs docked at intervals around the perimeter. How long has this been here? He asked Ryle, who had joined him at the viewport. Nearly 30 Earth years, the retainer replied. Since the consortium began expanding into your system, we needed a forward base to monitor their activities and protect potential targets. Like Earth? Ryle nodded. Your planet is of particular interest to them, rich in resources, diverse in biosphere, and with a population that remains largely unaware of interstellar politics. Perfect for exploitation. And Lumina, how does she fit into this? Ryle's expression darkened. The royal family of Lumeria has opposed consortium expansion for generations. When they orchestrated the coup 5 of your Earth years ago, the king and queen were executed publicly. We believed the princess had suffered the same fate, until rumors reached us of a royal child sold into servitude. It has taken us this long to locate her. Jace felt sick at the thought of what Lumina had endured in those years. The marks on her back, ownership brands, Ryle confirmed grimly. The consortium marks all slaves according to their assigned function and origin. The princess was classified as a trophy asset, kept by a high-ranking official as a symbol of Lumeria's fall. And the pendant she wears? A fragment of the Lumerian royal crystal. It contains genetic markers that respond only to the royal bloodline. It is both her birthright and the source of considerable power. Power she has only begun to access, as you witnessed at your farm. The ship docked with a gentle shudder, and activity increased around them as the crew prepared for disembarkation. Lumina, who had been dozing against Jace's side, stirred and blinked at the viewports. "We're here," Jace told her softly. "On the moon." She nodded, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at Rufus, who had recovered enough to sit upright, though he still stayed close to both of them. "Will they let Rufus stay?" she asked, worried. "I'll make sure of it," Jace promised, though he had no idea how much influence he would have in this alien resistance movement. As it turned out, his concern was unnecessary. When they exited the ship into the lunar base, they were greeted by a delegation of officials clearly prepared for the princess's arrival. At the sight of Rufus, there were a few raised eyebrows, or what passed for eyebrows on some of the non-human members, but no one objected to the dog's presence. "Your Highness," the apparent leader of the delegation greeted Lumina with a formal bow. "Welcome to Artemis Base. We have prepared quarters for you and your companions." Lumina straightened, and Jay saw a glimpse of the royal heritage Ryle had described. Despite her small stature and tattered clothing, she carried herself with sudden dignity. "Thank you," she replied in careful English. "Jace and Rufus stay with me." It wasn't a request, but a command, and the officials exchanged glances before the leader nodded. "Of course, Your Highness. We have arranged adjoining rooms for your comfort and privacy." As they were led through the base, Jace marveled at the diversity of the resistance members they passed. Some appeared nearly human, while others were strikingly alien in form. All, however, showed deference to Lumina, bowing or making other gestures of respect as she passed. Their quarters were simple but comfortable. 3 connected rooms with furnishings that appeared to have been hastily adapted for human and canine use. Food and water had been provided, though Jace eyed the alien fare with some trepidation. "It's safe for your consumption," one of their guides assured him. "We have studied Earth biology thoroughly. The canine's meal is there." He pointed to a bowl containing what looked like premium dog food. When they were finally left alone, Jace sank onto the edge of a bed, the reality of their situation crashing over him in waves. Rufus padded over and rested his head on Jace's knee, offering silent comfort, as he had so many times before. "What have we gotten ourselves into, boy?" Jace murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. Lumina emerged from exploring the adjoining room, her pendant glowing softly against her chest. In the gentle light, she looked even younger than Jace had initially thought, perhaps equivalent to a human 7- or 8-year-old. "Are you okay?" he asked her. "This must be overwhelming." She considered the question with a seriousness beyond her years. "I remember some," she said finally. "From before, being princess, having parents." Her hand went to the pendant. "This helps me remember." "And now? How do you feel now?" Lumina sat beside him on the bed, her feet dangling above the floor. "Scared," she admitted, "but safe with you, with Rufus." The simple declaration warmed something in Jace's chest. After a moment's hesitation, he put an arm around her small shoulders. "We're not going anywhere, promise." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, each processing the dramatic changes the day had brought. Rufus eventually moved to investigate his food bowl, and the sound of his contented eating brought a smile to both their faces. A soft chime announced a visitor, and the door slid open to reveal Ryle. The retainer had changed from his combat gear into more formal attire that emphasized his position. Your Highness, he greeted Lumina. The Council requests your presence for a briefing on the situation on Lumeria. There are decisions that must be made regarding next steps. Lumina tensed beside Jace. Tomorrow, she said firmly. Rest first. Ryle hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the needs of a child who had endured trauma beyond imagination. The consortium will not wait, Your Highness. Their forces are mobilizing. The incident at the Earth Farm has accelerated their timeline. Tomorrow, Lumina repeated, and Jace heard the echo of generations of royal authority in that single word. Ryle bowed. As you wish, Your Highness. I will inform the Council. He straightened, his gaze moving to Jace. Perhaps, however, you would permit me a moment with your protector. There are matters he should be aware of. Lumina looked to Jace questioningly. It's okay, he assured her. I'll just be in the hallway. Rufus will stay with you. At the mention of his name, Rufus looked up from his food bowl, then trotted over to settle at Lumina's feet in a clear statement of his priorities. The gesture drew a small smile from the princess. In the corridor outside their quarters, Ryle's formal demeanor softened slightly. You have done a remarkable thing, Jace Tanner. Few would take the risk you did for a stranger, an alien stranger. At that, Jace shrugged uncomfortably. She needed help. Anyone would have... No, Ryle interrupted gently. They would not. That is precisely why the consortium has been able to expand unchecked for so long. Too many look away from suffering that does not directly affect them. He studied Jace with newfound respect. The princess trusts you implicitly. That is significant. What happens now? Jace asked. What does the council want from her? To lead, Ryle replied simply. The resistance has fought for years without a figurehead, without a symbol to rally around. The princess's survival changes everything. With her as our leader, we can unite the scattered factions, challenge the consortium directly. She's a child, Jace protested. She's been through hell. She needs time to heal, to be safe, not to be thrust into a war. I agree, Ryle said, surprising him. But time is a luxury we may not have. The consortium knows she is alive now. They will stop at nothing to recapture or kill her. Our best protection, her best protection, is to strengthen our position, to move against them before they can regroup. Jace ran a hand through his hair in frustration. So what do you want from me? Your continued presence, Ryle answered. Your support. The princess trusts you and the canine. In a way, she does not yet trust us. That bond is precious and tactically valuable. We're not tactics, Jace said sharply. We're not going to be used to manipulate her. Of course not, Ryle assured him. But your perspective, your humanity, if you will, may be exactly what she needs to balance the demands of her position with the needs of her spirit. He paused. And what the resistance needs to remember what we're fighting for. Before Jace could respond, the door to their quarters slid open, and Lumina appeared, Rufus at her side. Is everything okay? She asked, looking between them with concern. Everything's fine, Jace assured her. Ryle was just filling me in on some details. She didn't appear entirely convinced, but nodded. Come back inside, I'm tired. Of course, Jace turned to Ryle. If you'll excuse us? The retainer bowed. Rest well, Your Highness. Mr. Tanner. He withdrew down the corridor, leaving them alone. Inside their quarters, Jace found that someone had delivered clothing sized for both him and Lumina while they were speaking with Ryle. The new garments were simple but clean, a vast improvement over their rain-soaked, battle-torn attire. After they had changed and eaten, fatigue settled over them like a heavy blanket. The day's events had drained them physically and emotionally. Lumina curled up on her bed, Rufus jumping up to settle beside her without invitation. For once, Jace didn't correct the dog's behavior. Some rules were meant to be broken. "Will you stay?" Lumina asked sleepily, as Jace prepared to retire to the adjoining room. He hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." He settled into a chair near her bed, prepared to keep watch through the night. As Lumina drifted toward sleep, her hand resting on Rufus's fur, she murmured something in her native language, something that sounded like a prayer, or perhaps a memory. Then, in English, "Thank you for finding me." "Thank Rufus," Jace replied softly. "He knew you were there before I did." Lumina smiled without opening her eyes. Her hand tightened slightly in Rufus's fur, and the dog sighed contentedly in response. Jace watched them both, this unlikely pair, alien princess and earth dog, finding comfort in each other's presence. Whatever challenges awaited them, whatever role they were expected to play in this interstellar conflict, one thing was certain: they were no longer alone. They had found each other, and in doing so, had formed a bond that transcended species, planets, and the vast darkness of space itself. As Lumina's breathing deepened into sleep, Jace made a silent promise to both her and Rufus. He would protect them, support them, stand with them against whatever came next. Not because she was a princess, or because destiny demanded it, but because in the quiet moments of trust, in a frightened child reaching out to stroke a dog's ear, in a loyal companion offering comfort to a stranger, he had glimpsed something worth fighting for. Family, in its strangest and most wonderful form. The Resistance Council convened the following day in a chamber deep within the lunar base. Jace, feeling distinctly out of place in borrowed clothing that marked him clearly as an Earthling, stood beside Lumina as representatives from a dozen worlds discussed strategy, resources, and the implications of the princess's return. Rufus lay at Lumina's feet, occasionally raising his head when voices grew heated, but otherwise remaining calm. His presence seemed to ground the young princess, who stood with remarkable composure before the assembled delegates. "The consortium will accelerate their timetable for Earth now," one representative was saying, a tall, blue-skinned being with 4 arms and eyes that reflected light like a cat's. "They know we have established contact. They will move to secure their interests before we can intervene." "All the more reason to strike first," argued another, more humanoid in appearance but with metallic scales instead of skin. "With the princess as our standard bearer, we can rally the outer systems, cut off their supply lines, isolate their command structure." "And risk the princess in open conflict?" Ryle interjected. "She has only just been recovered. She requires time to heal, to reclaim her heritage." "Time is a luxury," began the blue-skinned delegate. "That we must make," Ryle finished firmly. "We have fought without hope for 5 years. We can fight with patience for a few more months." Throughout the debate, Lumina remained silent, her yellow eyes moving from speaker to speaker. Jace could sense her tension in the slight trembling of her shoulders beneath his steadying hand. Finally, one delegate, older than the others, with skin like polished obsidian, addressed her directly. "What does the princess herself wish? It is her birthright we fight for, her people who suffer under consortium rule." All eyes turned to Lumina. Jace felt a surge of protective instinct. She was just a child, thrust into an impossible position. But before he could intervene, she stepped forward, her hand moving to touch the pendant at her neck. "I wish," she began, her voice small but clear, "to be worthy of your trust, of your fight." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "My parents died because they opposed consortium, because they believed in freedom for all worlds." The chamber had fallen completely silent. "I was slave for 5 years," she continued. "I saw others, many others treated as things, not people. Some from Earth, some from other worlds." A murmur passed through the assembly at this confirmation of Earth abductions. "I am not ready to lead army," Lumina admitted. But I am ready to learn, to help however I can. Her free hand found Rufus's head, resting on it as if drawing strength. And to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The obsidian-skinned delegate bowed deeply. Wisdom beyond years, Your Highness. Perhaps the direct approach is indeed premature. A period of preparation, of strategic positioning, would serve us better than hasty action. Agreement rippled through the council. Plans began to form, for Lumina's education in leadership and Lumerian history, for strengthening resistance positions in key systems, for monitoring consortium movements around Earth. Through it all, Jace marveled at the young princess's composure. Only he, standing close beside her, could feel the slight trembling of her body, could see the tension in her small frame. When the council finally adjourned, he felt her sag with relief. You did wonderfully, he told her, as they returned to their quarters. I'm proud of you. Lumina nodded tiredly. It was hard. So many looking at me, expecting things. That's the burden of leadership, Ryle commented, walking alongside them. But you bore it well, Your Highness. Your parents would be proud. At the mention of her parents, a shadow passed across Lumina's face. She said nothing more until they reached their rooms, where she immediately retreated to the window that overlooked the lunar landscape. Rufus, following close behind. She needs time, Jace told Ryle quietly. This is all happening too fast. The retainer nodded. I agree. I have arranged for a period of adjustment before formal training begins. 2 Earth weeks of relative seclusion, with only essential personnel permitted access. Thank you, Jace said, surprised by the concession. Do not mistake me. Jace Tanner, Ryle replied, his voice low. I serve the princess and the cause of Lumerian freedom, but I am not blind to the needs of the child beneath the crown. He glanced toward Lumina, who was now kneeling beside Rufus, whispering something to the attentive dog. She has endured much, too much. When Ryle had departed, Jace joined Lumina at the window. The view was stunning. A stark, cratered landscape stretching to a sharp horizon, the black sky above unmarred by atmosphere. Earth hung in that sky like a blue and white jewel. It looks so peaceful from here, Jace commented. Lumina nodded. Beautiful. Like Lumeria, from space. Her expression grew distant. I remember looking up at stars from royal gardens. Father teaching me constellations. You'll see those gardens again, Jace promised, though he had no right or power to make such guarantees. Maybe. She looked up at him, yellow eyes serious. But different now. I am different. Jace couldn't argue with that. The experiences that had shaped her, the loss of her parents, years of slavery, her daring escape, had undoubtedly changed her from the carefree princess she might have been. Different isn't bad, he offered. Just different. Lumina considered this, then turned her attention to Rufus, who had settled comfortably at her feet. Without warning, she dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around the dog's neck in a tight embrace. Rufus, startled but pleased by the sudden affection, wagged his tail vigorously. Lumina pressed her face into his fur, shoulders shaking slightly. It took Jace a moment to realize she was crying, silent tears soaking into Rufus's coat. Hey, he said gently, kneeling beside them. It's okay. You're safe now. Not crying because scared, Lumina said, her voice muffled against Rufus. Crying because happy. Because Rufus. She struggled to find the words. Because he doesn't care if I'm princess or slave or alien. He just loves. The simple truth of it struck Jace like a physical blow. In all the complexity of interstellar politics and resistance movements, in all the weight of royal responsibility and strategic planning, this was what mattered most. The unconditional acceptance of a loyal dog. That's right, he agreed, his own throat tight with emotion. That's Rufus. And you know what? I feel the same way he does. Lumina lifted her tear-streaked face, studying him with those luminous eyes. Promise. Promise, Jace confirmed. Princess or not, you're Luma to us. Always will be. She nodded, accepting this pledge with the gravity it deserved. Then, surprising him, she shifted her embrace to include him as well, her thin arms stretching to encircle both man and dog. Family, she said simply. Jace returned the embrace, his heart full. Family, he agreed. Rufus, not to be outdone, wriggled until he could lick both their faces, drawing a startled laugh from Lumina. The sound, so young, so genuine, filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. In that moment, with Earth hanging in the black sky outside their window, and the weight of a resistance movement resting on small green shoulders, something new was born. Not a strategic alliance, not a political arrangement, but something far more precious and powerful. A family forged across the stars, bound by love rather than blood. Whatever challenges awaited them, consortium hunters, the politics of rebellion, the long road to reclaiming Lumina's birthright, they would face them together. Farmer, princess, and loyal dog. An unlikely trio, perhaps, but in their bond lay a strength that even the vast darkness of space couldn't diminish. As night fell on the lunar base, an arbitrary designation, as there was no true day or night on the moon's surface, Jace watched Lumina and Rufus curled together in sleep. The pendant at her throat glowed softly, a reminder of her heritage and the power she had yet to fully claim. But for now, she was simply a child, finding comfort in the warmth of a loyal companion. Tomorrow would bring counsels and strategies, training and decisions. The burden of leadership would settle more firmly on those small shoulders. The consortium would continue its hunt, its reach extending across star systems. The fate of worlds, including Earth, might hang in the balance of choices yet to be made. But tonight, in the quiet of their quarters on a secret base on the far side of the moon, none of that mattered. Tonight, there was only this, a family, newly formed but unbreakable, resting together in the gentle glow of a crystal from a distant world and the unwavering light of love that needed no words to express its depth. Jace settled into the chair beside their bed, prepared to keep watch through the artificial night. Outside their window, distant Earth turned slowly, unaware of the forces gathering around it, unaware of the small princess who had found refuge on its moon, unaware of the simple farmer and his dog who had chosen to stand with her against the darkness. Some choices, Jace reflected as he watched over his unlikely family, were larger than the individuals who made them. Some connections transcended the boundaries of species and planets. And sometimes, the most powerful force in the universe was not found in weapons or strategies or royal bloodlines, but in the simple act of a frightened child finding the courage to hug a dog like family.